You know, they had 9 great actors in this film.
Hey everyone, we'll just wait a couple minutes for more people to join us. If you're wondering why I'm laughing, it's because Mr. Q is calling me from downstairs and he's talking something about the fall of the Roman Empire. I'm not sure, but he should know that this is my time to spend with you. So welcome to another Thursday night live with Mrs. Q. I see a bunch of people are there. Please feel free to say hi in the chat or to send me any questions as we go along. I'll be happy to answer them, your questions and comments. Mr. White, Mr. Trollinger, Mr. Weitzman, nice to see all of you. My dog Rex is here early. Hello, my dog Rex. And yes, be sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and share these videos with people who you know who want to learn more about the American Revolution, the history of the founding of America without any modern revisionism from either side of the political aisle, just the way it happened according to original documents of the time. Give me a second. I'm just going to grab a little drink of water here. Hello, Mr. Davis. It's nice to see you tonight as well. I hope everybody's had a good week since I saw you last. I had a super fantastic time last Sunday at the Battle of Newtown near Elmira, New York. One of the most fun reenactments I've ever attended. I didn't go as a reenactor. I went as an observer and as a documentarian, but it was still a wonderful event. And of course, last Sunday in New York City, Saturday and Sunday were the various commemorations of the Battle of Long Island or Battle of Brooklyn, which I usually attend but didn't get a chance to because I was at Newtown this year. So missed all my friends in New York, but it looks like they did a fabulous commemoration over the weekend. And they always do when they do that one in New York, because it is their hometown, right? So they do a great job. So tonight, we are going to be talking about a subject that seems to never lose its controversy, and that is the treason trial of Vice President Aaron Burr. Last week, remember, we spoke a little bit more about Aaron Burr last week and other things that were going on. And so I thought we would talk about the treason trial tonight, which I'm having trouble with my green screen in some spot there. Let me just pull this up a little closer. There it is. There, that looks a little bit better now. We were talking about the election of 1800 last week, and I ended that, with a little bit more about Mr. Burr. So I thought tonight we would talk about Aaron Burr's treason trial, because the treason trial really comes on that path after the election of 1800. So if you understand all of the politics of the election of 1800, you can better understand the treason trial. Hello, Mr. White. Welcome to our home here and my little parlor here in Hanover Square, New York. I'm very happy to see you here, and I hope Mr. Q let you in politely. I don't know, he's downstairs. I think he's reading Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire or something tonight, because he shouted up to me something about the end of the Roman Empire. So I'm really not sure what Mr. Q is up to down there, but as long as he keeps the dog down there and keeps him quiet for this time, I'm sure things will be fine. So as I mentioned, if we understand the election of 1800, which we talked about last week, it's much easier to understand, I was going to say Reverend Aaron Burr's treason trial in 1807. So if we pick up after the election of 1800, and I mentioned last week, oh, and by the way, I just wanted to say before I really get started here, that the treason trial of Aaron Burr, or Vice President Burr's trial, or the Burr conspiracy, or whatever you would like to call it, seems to be one of those subjects that many people, no matter how much evidence you show them to the contrary, still believe things that simply aren't true. And they either believe them, I think it might be human nature. It might be the same in your time as now, because people here know Mr. Burr and they've seen all of the evidence that's been talked about. It's been in all the newspapers, still insist on believing things that aren't true. And it could be because they have a prejudice against Mr. Burr. It could be that all of their friends think the same way, so they want to fit in with their social circles, or they think it might get them, liked by other people. I'm really not sure, but this bias just seems to be a part of human nature, and we run across it all the time in various subjects. LB Girl 88, hello to you too. Even when it comes to rethinking about the ratification of the United States Constitution and all of the opposition there was to it here in New York, there are still people who refuse to admit there was any opposition at all. So with the trial of Vice President Burr, we find that as well. People who will insist that Mr. Burr was guilty of treason. I'll still run into people on the street who will say to me, well, your old friend, Vice President Burr, committed treason. Well, tonight I'm going to show you, I hope, that he did not. And hopefully, since you're all my good friends here, you will be able to use your reason over your emotion and make up your mind by the end of our time together whether or not Mr. Burr did commit treason. So I mentioned in the election of 1800 that when the House was voting, right, when the electoral vote was tied and the House was voting, that there were rumors that Burr wanted the presidency for himself. And there seems to be no actual proof of that. If Burr had wanted the presidency, he could have had it. He could have packed his bags, gone to Washington, D.C., and the vote would have favored him had he gone and advocated on his behalf. He felt that it was ungentlemanly, and he did not do that. So that didn't happen, but those rumors persisted to the point where they made President Jefferson distrustful and a little bit worried about Burr's intents as vice president. And there were also voices here in New York that really, shall I say, encouraged that type of thinking on Mr. Jefferson's part. And President Jefferson should have not listened to them, as, well, most of them were his political enemies, weren't they? They were Federalists, but some of them were Democratic Republicans. I'm going to talk about who they were and what they were up to, because politics is a very complex thing, even in my time. And the different factions don't always stand for what they would like people to believe they stand for. So you really have to watch and see what they do rather than hear what they say in order to find favor with the people. So Mr. Burr goes on to serve as Vice President Burr under President Thomas Jefferson, and he is a very popular leader of the United States Senate. My dog Rex says Washington committed treason when he invaded Pennsylvania, and Hamilton wanted to hang the tax protesters. Well, that was a problem, wasn't it? But it made Hamilton a general, which he always wanted to be. Michael Gaddy, great period look. Thank you, Mr. Gaddy. Thank you so much. I love this room. This is a later period room than I use when I'm talking about the Revolutionary War. So this is one of my favorite background rooms. So Mr. Burr goes on to be the leader of the Senate, correct? Even in your time, I believe the vice president is the president of the Senate. Now, I think in your time, the vice president doesn't really participate in the Senate except to break a tie vote. But in our time, the vice president was very active in the Senate, and Mr. Burr took a very serious leadership position in that body and really turned that body into a serious, deliberative body where he encouraged formal debate among the members and really is responsible for putting together a more serious body than it was previously. Instituted rules of behavior, rules of decorum, when people could speak, what debates might be about, how debates would be handled, and all of that sort of thing. And he was very well liked for bringing this sort of order and respectability to the United States Senate. So very well-respected vice president. But during his time as vice president, these other voices are still telling President Jefferson not to trust Burr. Don't trust Burr. And one of those voices is Democratic Republican of New York, George Clinton, who you might remember was also maybe the author of a number of letters signed by Cato, which were against ratification of the Constitution. So George Clinton is an anti-federalist, or political wise, he is a Democratic Republican and a supporter of Burr, a supporter of Jefferson, or Jefferson and Burr. But he has some ideas himself about where he wants to go politically that we'll see come to fruition here. So these voices are telling Jefferson not to trust Burr. And during the time that Burr is vice president, President Jefferson attempted to remove federal justices from the Supreme Court. President Jefferson felt that there were too many Federalist justices on the Supreme Court. And I have to look, I wrote down the number here. I think it was 5-1 Federalists versus Democratic Republicans. Yes, so it was 5-1 Federalists against Democratic Republicans. And so Mr. Jefferson, President Jefferson, decides he wants to be rid of one. And he wants to be rid of the one he perceives to be the most extreme Federalist of all of them, Samuel Chase. Now, the House and the Senate are both majority Democratic Republicans at this time. Remember, I told you about Aaron Burr's successful move in New York to gather all of those Democratic Republican seats and his travels through New England. So Democratic Republicans have done very well in the elections leading up to the presidential election and hold a majority in both houses. Mr. Jefferson is successful in getting the House of Representatives to impeach Justice Chase. I think it is on 8 counts. And this is in 1804. And there's a lot of things going on in 1804. I think it's 8 counts that they impeach him on. So remember how impeachment works, right? Evidence is brought to the House of Representatives, and then the House of Representatives works sort of like a grand jury. They hear those charges, and then they decide whether or not the charges have enough evidence to go to trial. And if they decide that, they vote yes, and that is an impeachment. Now, the next step is in the Senate, which then holds a trial and votes whether or not to remove the person from office. This is why it is possible to be impeached, but to not be removed from office. So the two bodies have very different functions in this process. So the House of Representatives returned impeachment on those 8 different issues. Now, the trial in the Senate was Democratic Republicans 25, Federalists 9. Of course, President Jefferson thought he would easily win removal of Justice Chase in the Senate. However, Vice President Burr, who himself was an esteemed lawyer, very well respected in his law career, right? Remember, he was not only the highest paid, one of the most successful lawyers in New York City previous to this, but he also served as New York State Attorney General for 2 terms. So he's very knowledgeable about the law. And so Vice President Burr holds a very formal trial in the Senate of Justice Chase. He outfits the Senate chambers like a courtroom, puts a witness box there, a place for him to sit as a judge, a place for the lawyers to sit to argue, and a trial takes place in the Senate. Burr acts as a judge in the trial and conducts a very formal procedure, at the end of which Justice Chase is not found guilty on any of the counts. All 8 counts are acquitted, and Justice Chase stays on the court. Now, what do you think President Jefferson does? President Jefferson is furious because if he had had that removal of Justice Chase, the next judge in his crosshairs was John Marshall. And John Marshall knew this. and there was no love between Justice Marshall and President Jefferson. Well, also, in 1804, Burr opts not to run for president again or as vice president again because he knows Jefferson doesn't want him. They're at odds. And so he decides instead to run for governor of New York. I'm not going to go into all the ins and outs of that whole event. We'll do that another night, the 1804 race for New York governor. But let's suffice it to say that it was a very political, very nasty, a lot of what I think in your time call fake news flying back and forth. And as a result of all of those hostilities, Mr. Burr lost that election. Now, even though Aaron Burr is a Democratic Republican and George Clinton is a Democratic Republican, there were two factions of that party in New York, Burrites and Clintonites. So they're a little bit different, right? The followers of Aaron Burr and the followers of George and his nephew, DeWitt Clinton. And that Clintonite faction moved against Burr during that election. Now, that didn't enrage Burr, as Burr knew that that was just normal politics for New York. He was able to accept that. But what he was angry about was Alexander Hamilton's behavior in that gubernatorial election, in which Hamilton attended to meddle in the election by claiming all of these lies about Aaron Burr, falsehoods about Burr and his daughter, and declared that his father-in-law, Philip Schuyler, was in agreement with him. He did this at a public meeting somewhere around Albany. Now, everyone knew at the time that the Schuylers were supporting Burr for the governorship, as were the Livingstons. And so this was kind of an odd thing. And all of this wound up in the newspaper due to a letter someone wrote to someone else, including all of the insults that Hamilton had repeated at that meeting in the newspaper. So now, after years and years and years of issues with Hamilton, Burr called his friend Mr. Davis and asked Mr. Davis what he ought to do. And Mr. Davis suggested, I'm sorry, it wasn't Mr. Davis, it was Mr. Van Ness. Excuse me for confusing these men, both very close friends of Mr. Burr. Mr. Van Ness, Peter Van Ness, William Peter Van Ness, known around the city as Peter. So Mr. Van Ness suggested to Mr. Burr that he simply write Mr. Hamilton a letter asking him to disavow those public insults, which they both thought Mr. Hamilton would do because it wasn't seemly for the public to know that one had said such things in public. And they thought that Mr. Hamilton, being a gentleman, would not want to be known for saying such things and would agree to either apologize or disavow, say he never said them. So they gave him the opportunity to apologize or simply say, I never said those things. And Mr. Hamilton refused to do so. He said they were all true. And he wrote Mr. Burr a somewhat provocative letter, which Mr. Burr responded to. Now, remember, we are dealing with two very successful gentlemen, two gentlemen who started out in 1775 with no money, little prestige, as soldiers in the American Revolution. Both came out of the Revolutionary War as decorated officers, Burr as a combat hero. Both went on to have very successful law careers and to serve in various roles in the government and become powerful political leaders. So these are two gentlemen who are used to getting into the debate with everything. And a series of letters went back and forth between the two gentlemen. Mr. Burr, becoming, frustrated that he could get nowhere with this, finally asked Mr. Van Ness to go speak to Mr. Hamilton. Mr. Van Ness asked Mr. Hamilton, what would you like Burr to do so that we can get this to go away. What are you offering Burr? Burr is ready to accept almost any type of apology from you just to make this whole thing end. And Hamilton said he had nothing to say. And he said to Mr. Van Ness, tell Mr. Burr to do as he must. Meaning, challenge me to a duel. And you all know what happened. Mr. Burr challenged Mr. Hamilton to the duel. They went to New Jersey. They had the duel according to all of the code of dueling in New Jersey. The duel was completely legal there. They followed all of the code. Both of their seconds agreed that everything was done properly in the duel. And Mr. Burr shot and killed Mr. Hamilton in the duel. And all kinds of stories came out of that, didn't it? Stories that Mr. Hamilton didn't fire his gun, which of course both seconds said he did fire his gun. All sorts of things to call Burr a murderer. Now, who would be behind this? You would think it would be Mr. Hamilton's Federalist supporters, which maybe it was. But the largest faction behind this were the Clintonites, the followers of George Clinton, who themselves despised Hamilton, but saw an opportunity. Hamilton was gone. If they could remove Burr, they could coalesce power to themselves. Mrs. Emershaw says she believes Hamilton deliberately fired to miss Mr. Burr. Many people believe that, but that is not in either of the accounts. Oh, I'm sorry. That is true. Mr. Hamilton did shoot in the air over Burr's head, and he hit the branch over his head. That is true. Excuse me. I was thinking of Burr, the other side. It was what was at question at the duel was the sequence of the firing. Who fired at what sequence, and whether or not Burr aimed at Mr. Hamilton, which both seconds said he did not, that Burr shot to the side in the ground and the bullet ricocheted and hit Hamilton. Both seconds agreed that initially in their first reports that Burr did not intend to shoot Mr. Hamilton, that they were both shooting a gentleman's duel, Hamilton shooting over and Burr shooting to the side. So Mrs. Emershaw is correct in that Hamilton did shoot over Burr's head. At any rate, the biggest group to call Mr. Burr and his followers murderers were the Clintonites. Isn't that interesting? To get rid of them both, wouldn't it? Not only that, but Clinton's attorney general in New York tried to indict Mr. Burr and all of his followers on the charge of murder. And that would include some people you may still remember, like Washington's Irving's brother, Peter Irving, like Marinus Willett, the war hero and former mayor of New York, and quite a few other names you might recognize. Of course, Mr. Davis, Mr. Van Ness, and all of Burr's close friends tried to indict them all for murder. But nothing happens in New York. And there were no real charges, but it was in the newspapers, which made people think that Burr and his followers were murderers and got Burr to have to leave New York. So now Governor Clinton and his nephew DeWitt Clinton are the two most powerful politicians in New York. You see how that works? Interesting, right? And who became, does anybody know, Thomas Jefferson's next vice president? Does anyone know who that was? It was George Clinton. Wow, look at how that goes. So that's 1804. So Burr now is no longer, starting the following year, going to be vice president. He retires from the Senate. And at that time, his friends in the Senate, as I mentioned, Burr was very highly respected and beloved in the Senate, encouraged him to move to Tennessee. And they said, Burr, move to Tennessee. You are loved in the South. You will easily win a seat for the Senate there, and you can rejoin us and bring your talents back to the United States Senate. I should also add that Burr worked tirelessly in the Senate to have various types of legislation passed to benefit the people of America. He was very hard worker when he was in the Senate. And Burr said, well, I don't know, I'll think about it. And instead, he traveled to the Ohio Valley and the Louisiana Purchase. Here we go. So now let's remember Jefferson's grudge against Burr over the Chase trial. Burr goes out to the Ohio Valley. He takes a tour. He goes down to the Louisiana Purchase. Also remember at this time that there is a great deal of legal arguing going on over the status of the Louisiana Purchase. Well, remember last week I said when the election of 1800 came about, when Thomas Jefferson won the election, that New England threatened to secede from the Constitution, right? They didn't do it, but they threatened to. Did you know that after Jefferson negotiated and finalized the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, I think it was, New England again threatened to secede from the United States of America because they said that Jefferson did not have the legal ability to negotiate the expansion of the country that way. They also were afraid that the new territories, when they became states, would be slave-owning states, which would give the South not only a majority in the House of Representatives, but now a majority in the Senate as well. And that threat to secede from the Constitution also played into the election of 1804, as Hamilton believed Burr had promised New England that if he became governor, New York would secede with those New England states. This is an absolute lie. Burr never spoke to them or had any knowledge of that. So this was just a complete lie told to Hamilton by his Federalist friends in New England, and Hamilton believed it. Burr had no intention of ever doing that. So back to Burr. So Burr is out there and he leased quite a lot of land. I have the note here, 40,000 acres of land. So Burr leases 40,000 acres of land in the new Louisiana territory there. And he's traveling around and he has a whole expedition with him. And leading him, helping him out with this expedition is James Wilkinson, who is the commander of the United States Army in New Orleans. And he's also governor of the Louisiana Territory. So remember him, Commander Wilkinson. He's also friends with Harmon Blennerhassett, who has a private island. And Blennerhassett allows Burr's expedition to stay on this island. Now, Burr foresaw the Spanish-American War, but a little bit too early. He assumed this war was coming and was in touch with Andrew Jackson, who at that time was the commander of the Tennessee militia. Jackson had agreed that if there was a conflict with Spain over this land, that he would join with Burr's expedition to defend that area. Burr thought that once that was over and they successfully defended that area from the Spanish, that Burr would then be able to invest in that territory himself and make quite a lot of money as an investor. So that was Burr's idea. Now, Burr's men at the time were armed only with, hunting materials. They didn't have military weapons. They would have been depending on Andrew Jackson for that. Now, Wilkinson, commander, let's go back. Who is Wilkinson? Is the commander of the army and the governor of the Louisiana Territory, right? He's a spy for Spain as well. He's a spy for Spain. He's starting to worry that he may be exposed as a spy for Spain. So he tells Jefferson that Burr was planning to mount a secession and take that territory for himself. So what do you think Jefferson does? Oh, Jefferson is still angry at Burr over the trial, right? Still angry at Burr over the trial. So he sees now an opportunity and he charges Burr with treason. And Burr is eventually arrested in Richmond, Virginia on the charge of treason. Aren't these intrigues wonderful? Who's going to be the justice in Aaron Burr's treason trial? John Marshall. So John Marshall, he's on the Supreme Court, but that's his circuit, right? So you know how the Supreme Court works, right? All of those 9 justices also are the judge for different circuit courts in the United States. And it happened that John Marshall was a circuit court judge for the District of Virginia. Another Jefferson rival, enemy. I'll just come right out and say it, enemy. So Marshall is the judge in the trial. Who defends Aaron Burr? I know if Mr. Gaddy is there, Mr. Gaddy knows who those attorneys were. They were, I have to have the names here because I don't remember all of them. Edmund Randolph, who I think was the first attorney general, maybe. Might have been. John Wickham, the great Luther Martin, and Benjamin Gaines Botts. This is like a dream team of 1807. 4 of the greatest American lawyers here to defend Burr. Now, to prove treason, it has to be shown either the person admits in open court they committed treason, or it has to be proven by 2 witnesses that the person was in the room and engaged in treasonous activities with others. The only evidence they had about Burr was a letter supposedly written by Burr to someone else about his intent to conquer and take that land. So that was the only evidence against Burr. But Burr's lawyers got Wilkinson, to admit in open court that he forged the letter. And at that point, the trial became a laughing stock, Jefferson claimed all along that he had evidence, which he never produced. So there was no witnesses against Burr, no proof from Jefferson. And of course, when Marshall instructed the jury on what is required for treason, Burr was found not guilty. Jefferson then had Burr retried on misdemeanor charges, of which he was again acquitted. So, did Burr commit treason? A court says he didn't, right? A trial said he didn't. There was no evidence that he did. There may be speculation that he did, but we can't let speculation determine whether or not someone was guilty of something. But this, of course, ruined Burr's life because, at least for a time, because there was the duel with Hamilton and now this treason trial. And of course, in the newspapers, I wonder if this happens in your time, the newspapers in New York all declared Burr committed treason without bothering to report all of the rest of the intricacies of what was going on. So, of course, the New York people thought, and still think to this day, to your day, that Burr committed treason. Now, Burr at this time, also his daughter was married, living in South Carolina, and he had 1807 what year did Theodosia get married? A 6-year-old grandson, his only heir beside his daughter, Aaron Burr Alston in South Carolina. Burr, though, was so maligned now that he left and he went on an extended trip to Europe, where he wrote to his daughter and traveled. Theodosia, having no blood family except her father, her mother has died and she had no siblings, wrote repeatedly to now President Madison and Mrs. Madison to help her father return home to America. That any good word from President Madison meant that her father could return home and be with his daughter and only grandson. Now, let me remind you that it was Aaron Burr, when he was a senator, who introduced Mr. and Mrs. Madison. James Madison, who was very shy and awkward socially, introduced him to the most celebrated socialite in Philadelphia, the widow Dolly Todd, because Burr somehow sensed there was a possibility between them. He introduced them. If it wasn't for Burr, they would have never met, because Madison had no personality socially and would have never approached the widow Todd to speak to her had Burr not introduced them. And Miss Burr knew both Mr. and Mrs. Madison. They never responded to her letters asking for help for her to be with her father and to have her father with his grandson. By the time Mr. Burr arrived back in America, in less than 1 year, his grandson died and his daughter died, leaving him alone and ruined in New York. Fortunately, his friends, like Mr. Deus and Mr. Van Ness and some others who were around, assisted him in resuming his law career at that time. So a very terrible story. Terrible story. Let's see, what do we have? Mrs. Emershaw says, didn't Burr travel incognito to Tennessee? He was a marked man due to the Hamilton duel. Yeah, I think so. The press around the Hamilton duel was just, it's really outrageous what the press did, not only to him, though, but to Peter Irving. Peter Irving went to Europe as well, took his brother Washington Irving with him. They went to Europe. Marinus Willett, I think, simply retired and got out of politics altogether. And I'm trying to think of who some of the others were. Davis stayed around, Van Ness stayed around. But yeah, and most of that press came from the Federalists and the Clinton faction. The only newspaper in New York, or two newspapers in New York, I should say, that were in favor of Aaron Burr in 1804 was the Morning Chronicle, published by Peter Irving, also known as, are you ready? Miss Irving. I'll just leave that there for you, as you will. And the Corrector, published by Peter and Washington Irving. All of the other newspapers, whether they were Federalist or Democratic, Republican controlled, were all against Burr and called him a murderer. So it was, just impossible for Burr really to travel around, as so many people were infuriated, believing he purposely murdered Hamilton. So that would probably be part of the reason he was traveling very low key. I used another name too, and I should have put it in my notes when he was traveling. I don't know what it was. LB Girl 88 says Burr's Natchez attorney still has descendants in Natchez. Oh, that is really cool to know. Mr. White says Jefferson was a firm believer that anything not explicitly listed in the Constitution was not allowed. The Constitution makes no mention of purchase of land for expansion. Well, that's a nice irony, isn't it, Mr. White? Isn't it? And Ms. Marzoff says, hello from Tucson, Mrs. Q. Hello to Tucson. So that is interesting. We don't really learn in school about the controversy about the Louisiana Purchase, which caused quite a lot of problem and outrage when it occurred. But I just think it's interesting here that Jefferson, as Mr. White says, did not believe anything not explicitly listed in the Constitution was allowed. And then he did the Louisiana Purchase, and there's no mention of purchase of land in the Constitution. So that was very interesting, but a very controversial acquisition, the Louisiana Purchase. Was this Washington Irving the one who wrote The Legend of Sleepy Hollow from Miss Marzoff? Indeed it was. And he wrote those when he was in Europe. The Headless Horseman, Sleepy Hollow, all of those stories he wrote about the Dutch in the Hudson Valley, he wrote when he was traveling in Europe. One of the most incredible things that Washington Irving did when he was in Europe was he translated Christopher Columbus's, captain's journals, his diaries, from when he made his journey here, because Irving spoke fluent Spanish. But the other thing about Irving is that he was very well educated in a lot of different subjects, including botany and biology and animals. And it was Washington Irving who realized that when Christopher Columbus was writing about seeing mermaids, that he was seeing manatees, because Washington Irving himself knew what a manatee was for some reason and understood that from Europe, Columbus and his crew had never seen one, and with the fog and the sound, that they were actually seeing manatees. So Washington Irving did that translation of Christopher Columbus's logbooks. Very interesting. Irving was a very, very interesting man, extremely intelligent, wrote many different things, was engaged in very many different interests. And interestingly, he never married. He returned to America after that extensive trip in Europe and built a house on the Hudson River that's still there in your time. It's called Sunnyside, and you can visit it. It's a lovely house. And it's right along with all of those other 18th century mansions built in that section of the Hudson Valley. Sherry says Jefferson used power as president that he had previously condemned with Washington and Adams. He was a hypocrite. He took power to the next level. Well, Sherry, this is Mrs. Emershaw. This is interesting, isn't it? That we see so many people saying one thing. I dropped my glasses, excuse me. Saying one thing when they're fighting to gain power and doing something quite different when they're in power. For instance, the Alien and Sedition Acts, right? Limiting what people could publish and what they could say. Passed by Adams, encouraged by Hamilton, but look at what Hamilton and Adams were writing in the years leading to the American Revolution, which certainly was considered by England to be sedition. So we see this, when people get into office, they're not quite as excited about free speech as they were before they held office. Mrs. Emershaw says agreed. So it's an interesting evolution of how people are when they're seeking position versus how they are when they achieve that position. Mr. Brittner says, hello, it seems strange to me that if Burr didn't want to shoot Hamilton, then he might have aimed in a direction with zero chance for a hit, but he apparently didn't. He did aim in a direction where you wouldn't hit him. He aimed to the side, and that was perfectly acceptable in the code of dueling for you to shoot up or you to shoot at the side. There are other duels from that time in America where we find that people fired into the ground. One of those, it's that crazy duel between DeWitt Clinton and John Swartout, where I think they did 4 or 5 rounds of shots with DeWitt Clinton shooting into the ground, ultimately shooting into the ground. First, I think he hit Swartout twice. If somebody out there knows this duel, I used to know this duel very well, dueling with each other, and he hit Swartout in the leg. And he refused to receive satisfaction, right? Swartout wanted another shot. And they did another round. And I think then Clinton hit him in the thigh, in a major artery. And that's when the doctor might have been Isaac Ledyard. That might be why I know this so well. The doctor, Isaac Ledyard, then went up to look at Swartout and said, look, you're going to die if you don't get this taken care of. And he went over and talked to DeWitt Clinton, and DeWitt Clinton asked his second, what should I do? And he said, you should walk away. He says, because the guy is still shooting. He might get a lucky shot and kill you. So DeWitt Clinton, shot his last shot into the ground and left the duel. And Swartout survived. So that is actually a pretty honorable thing that DeWitt Clinton did, although I don't know if he was known for doing lots of honorable things, but shooting into the dirt was a perfectly acceptable alternative to shooting your opponent. It seems weird to us today. The whole code duello, all of the things they had to do in the duel, a lot of those things seem weird to us. I mean, dueling seems weird to us today, doesn't it? That, Hamilton's son wound up in a duel because someone called him a rascal. And rascal was considered to be a provocation to duel at that time, even though Hamilton's son was drunk and had behaved like a rascal when the other person called him a rascal, George Eaker, Mr. Eaker. Hamilton immediately challenged Eaker to a duel over that. That was a dueling insult, a rascal. Amazingly, over the years, though, even when he was accused of an improper relationship with his daughter and his adopted daughter, Burr did not challenge Hamilton to a duel, as Burr just wanted it to just disappear into the ether. He just didn't want to involve himself in that kind of personal conflict, even after years of being at the end of Hamilton's brutal insults. And a few years ago, I learned on my own walking tour that insult is still being repeated on a tour of the West Village in New York City, still today, that Burr had an improper relationship with his daughter, and his adopted daughter, Natalie Delage de Valois, the French girl he adopted, who then married the Sumter family of South Carolina. So that lie is still repeated today, and I think it might be in what's his name's massive book about Hamilton, whose name I forgot, the guy who wrote the great big book on Hamilton. That is not only is that in his book, but also in his book is that Miss Burr, Mrs. Alston, was in an abusive relationship with her husband, and reading their personal correspondence, there doesn't seem to be any indication that the two weren't completely in love and didn't have a loving and wonderful relationship with each other, with him really admiring her intellect and ability. Chernow, thank you, Miss Emershaw. It's not a night on Mrs. Q Live if I don't remember an important name. Mr. Chernow also repeats some of those rumors. So if you have any questions or comments, I'm happy to answer them. I just thought it would be interesting to have a look at the circuitous politics of the time and to show you that some things have not changed when it comes to politics and it comes to power and people in power who hold grudges against other people when they have their opportunities to hurt those other people. So, been happening for a very long time. I hope you guys all enjoyed this. I will be back next Thursday. And of course, Sunday night, I will be on republicbroadcasting.org talking more about the treason trial, I think, and some other things going on around that time in America, probably about the Louisiana Purchase and some things we did tonight in more depth. And what else? And Saturday, if you're an RBN fan, I will be joining Mike Gaddy's show at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. So I'll be on there from 4 to 7, not talking about Revolutionary War history, but some other things you'll find very provocative. I see everybody really liked it. Thank you so much. Don't forget to like my video and subscribe to my channel and share it as well, so more people can have fun learning about the American Revolution. And I'll see you all next week. Thank you all so much for joining me. Good night.